Hi, my name is Lee Stranahan, and welcome to Part 1 of Modeler Essentials. In this tape, we're going to be showing you the basic mechanics of the modeler, all the tools that you'll need to use the program to modify and create your own objects in Lightwave. And we'll also be showing you some basic object creation, as well as a number of tips that are helpful for working with text or flying logos. Now, we've got a lot of material to cover, so let's get started right away. All right, let's start by entering Lightwave. Of course, to do that, we hit the 3D button from the switcher interface. Now, we're using a Toaster 4000 here. Let's enter Modeler now. And the only differences between this and 3.0 as far as the Modeler is concerned are the yellow buttons here. Other than that, the programs work just the same. Now, what I want to start by doing is let's talk about the basic lay of the land here. And up the top, we have these different menu buttons, these various buttons here. Now, so we have Objects, Modify, Multiply, Polygon, Tools, and Display. These are your basic menus. And you notice changing these changes the buttons that we have over here on the left side. Now at the bottom of the screen we have a number of important things. Over in the far left hand corner, this shows us our current grid size. And it says right now grid is 50 centimeters. And that means that each one of these squares is 50 centimeters big. Since we don't have an object loaded, it doesn't tell us much right now. Once we start making an object, though, obviously it's very important to have your grid size set the way you want it. Ours is currently set to centimeters, but as we'll show you a little bit later, we could also change that to be English measurements such as inches or feet. Now, next to the grid button, we have these selection tools, point, polygon, and volume. We'll be talking about those more in depth later. And also the cut, copy, and paste tools, cut, copy, and paste, and my favorite, the undo button, just in case you make any mistakes. Now, up here, these buttons show us our different layers, which we'll be talking about more in depth later, as well as this button here, which brings us back to the main Lightwave screen. This is the layout button. So you can see Modeler brings you to Modeler, layout brings you back to layout. Now, this is the basic screen setup. This is basically the lay of the land in Modeler. But in order to understand a few of the basic functions, such as moving around the views, we really need to have something loaded. So let's go to the Object menu. We're going to load up an object that comes with your toaster. And let's just talk about, before we load something here, let's talk about just these first two buttons. About just tells us about the program. It tells us who wrote the program, when it was programmed, that sort of thing. It also tells us how much memory we have free, which is sometimes important, particularly if the program starts acting funny. You'll see if you have no memory, that could be the culprit right there. New just clears out everything. It lets you start a new project. And finally, let's pick up load here. Load lets us load any object we want. So I'm going to go to the Vehicles directory and load the Porsche. Now, by the way, you notice I hit the mouse buttons in order to do these. There's also a number of keyboard shortcuts, and we'll be showing you those throughout the tape. One key that's really handy, by the way, is the Porsche's loaded up now. One key that's really handy is the Help key. If any time you hit the Help key in Modeler, it gives you a list that you can scroll down of all your various keyboard shortcuts. Now, the one that we just used, load, keyboard shortcut is L, which would make sense. L, of course, first letter of load. So you'll see we'll be giving you those throughout the entire tape. Now, let's take a look at what we've got here on our screen. You'll notice it shows us three different views of this Porsche. Now, what you're seeing here is you're seeing three different views of one object. They all work together, and these are called the orthogonal views. These confuse people. One of the problems you have in 3D, of course, is that you're trying to represent a three-dimensional object, such as a car in this case, on a two-dimensional screen, your computer screen, only 2 dimensions. And so the computer program has to do some things, make some compromises in order for it to allow it to do that. Now, the way these orthogonal views work, we sort of made up this little chart here, and basically it's like these white lines that you see on the screen, here and here. These lighter lines are like hinges. You notice our views here give you these orthogonal views. Now, the way I say they're like hinges is because in order to understand how this two-dimensional view translates into a three-dimensional object, it's like you're folding back one view and to the side the other. In other words, it's like you're taking this top panel, folding it back just like we're doing here, taking the side panel right here, and folding it in. And then what we end up with, of course, is a three-dimensional cube, something that's actually got 3 dimensions to it. This is the way these work. This is the way the views work. So it gives you a couple of very important things. First off, you can tell which way the car is facing in this bottom view right here. The view that's labeled face. Well, is the car facing towards us or away from us? As far as you can tell from the face view, if you were just looking at face, there's absolutely no way to tell, because it's showing you a direct front-on view. You can't tell whether we're seeing the front or back of the car. Now, on the other hand, if we look at the left or the top views, and again, you picture them folding down or back, then you can see that since this is the front of the car, if we fold it down, and this is where we are, of course, where you are, in fact, in the camera view, since the front is up here, if we fold it down, now the front is towards the back. In other words, the front is away from you. And this gives you a way of deciding, for instance, whether we're looking at, whether in this view, the face view, the rear or the front of the car is closest to us. And obviously it's the rear that's closest to us. Now, you notice that the view is labeled face, but the rear of the car is closest to us. This face view, the one in the lower left-hand corner, is the most important view, because this shows you the way the object will load up in Lightwave. In fact, let's exit out to Lightwave for just a second to see that. If we exit out to the layout program, by the way, Shift-Q for quit would bring you up into layout quickly. It's a keyboard shortcut for layout. Let me just load up the Porsche. And what you'll see when it loads up here, if we go to camera view, just what we're seeing in face. Now, if we go to the top view here, you'll see the front of the car is facing away from us. Now, the reason for that is that vehicles, humans, or animals in Lightwave have all been modeled with the same convention, and that's that they are facing sort of rear towards you. If you load up the cow, for instance, you get a sort of big cow butt in your face, and the reason for that is not that the object you're trying to be rude, it's that if you think about the object moving forward, it's moving forward into the z-axis. Same thing with this vehicle here. This vehicle, if it was to move forward, it would be moving into the positive z-axis. And you can see that from the top view. Let me just use the comma key to back out. See, positive z is this way, negative z is that way. Here's our camera, here's our object. And this is a convention that you might want to follow in your own modeling. If you're creating a human, a vehicle, or an animal, anything like that, have it facing rear towards you, so when it moves forward, it's moving into the positive z. On the other hand, a logo object you would load in so the logo is facing towards you, so you can read the logo in that face view. And you'll see that when we load up a logo in a second. And this is the way, as you'll see also, the text function in Modeler automatically creates logos facing the right way. All right, so that's a little bit about the views. And again, as long as you just remember that model with the faces folding down or to the side, it'll make it a lot easier to see. All right. Now, we've seen the way the views work. Let's talk about moving around inside those views. And there's a whole bunch of tools that help us do that. Let's head back into Modeler here. And let's first talk about just one of the simplest ones is just moving around, getting a different view on things. Let's say we want to see more of the back of the car here. We just move our mouse over any window that we want, and then we can use the arrow keys, the up, down, left, or right arrow keys. Move the cursor over a window, hit it down. You notice it's moving down as far as this window is concerned. Right moves us to the right, left moves us to the left, just as you'd expect. Now, if you want to move to any specific point, you can hold down the Alt key, and while pressing and holding down the Alt key, keep it held down, you can click the left mouse button and drag, again, in any one of these windows. And what this will do is move you around. So this is just hold down Alt and drag. And again, that works in any of the three views. Now, another key that helps you a lot here is the Go To function. The way Go To works is you position your mouse pointer over an area that you want to focus on. Let's pick one of the mirrors of the car. So I will put the mouse aiming right over the mirror. Then I hit G for Go To. And it automatically centers wherever my mouse pointer was, right in the middle of the view. So you notice the mirror is right now in the center of this view. Now this makes it very, very handy if you're going to zoom in or zoom out. And there's a couple different ways we can zoom in or zoom out. The quickest way is with the comma or period keys. Comma zooms us back, period zooms us forward. Or shift comma, I'm holding down shift, shift comma moves us back twice as quickly, or shift period moves you forward twice as quickly. Okay, then there's also a couple of keys that let us fit things into all the windows. Let's talk about moving the windows around, resizing the windows, and fitting into them. What you'll notice is, first off, we can resize these windows just by clicking on the crosshairs where these windows meet here and dragging. I can make these windows any size I want. So if I want to focus on the side view of the car, for instance, I can make the side view very large, then kind of zoom in. Now, let me just remake this window. By the way, another way to size this window is if you have nothing happening in this upper quadrant here, you can click anywhere in this quadrant and that will resize as well. So it's another quick way, rather than trying to grab the crosshairs. As long as you have nothing going on up here, you can click and drag right up there. Now, once we've sized our windows, though, you'll notice the car is no longer fitting properly. I could zoom myself back out, but a quicker way is to use the A key. If I just hit the A, it stands for Fit All or Auto Fit. And it automatically fits the vehicle, in this case, into all three of our windows. Now, let's zoom out here again. Let's focus on the top view now. Let's try hitting A. And you'll notice it actually makes the car smaller. Now, the reason it did that is because it's trying to fit the vehicle, when you hit A, into all three windows. So you'll notice to fit it into this window and this window, which are very small right now, it's got to make the car very small. So it did that. Now, one thing that's interesting, if we pull this down all the way, pull it down as far to the one side and as far top and bottom as it can go, then we hit A, you'll notice it fits it properly in here. The key here is in 3.0 and 4000, if you size a window so it's full screen, in other words, it can't get any bigger, and you hit A, then it will automatically fit it into that window. Otherwise, even if there's a little sliver of it showing, you could do it a little bit more but haven't, like here, where I click it and bring it out a little bit. Then hitting A, again, doesn't necessarily fit it. There's a way that we can automatically fit it, though, even in this circumstance. Now, what we do in this case is we would move our pointer over the window that we want to fit. In other words, we want it to fit in the top view here. Hold down Control and then hit A. So I'm using Control and A in combination. And you notice how that fits it into the top view. And again, since it's making the view larger in the top view, it also does it in the face and the other side view here. Now, all the different movement things I've just shown you, I've been showing you keyboard equivalents for. There's a way to do them using just the menu. There's a whole menu, actually, that gives you these options. But I showed you with the keyboard shortcut first because that's the way you should do it. You may notice, through careful observation, you have two hands. And a lot of people, when they get into using a computer, they get used to, they have the mouse there, and they get kind of lazy and they get used to doing everything with the mouse. The way you want to use the computer, again, assuming you've got two hands, is use one on the mouse and the other one on your keyboard. And that lets you move much more quickly, and particularly for things like zooming in and out, scrolling around the different views, keyboard shortcuts are the way to go. It'll be uncomfortable at first. Go through that small period and you'll find you work about twice as fast. Let me show you how you could do some of this stuff by using the display menu. The display menu is just up here. Click on display. And you notice we have things like magnify. This lets us zoom in or out. We've got pan. This lets you move around. We've got in or out. I don't really need to explain that one to you. We have fit all, which is keyboard shortcut A. Fit selected. Again, we don't have anything selected. We'll talk about that a little bit later. There's a couple of other things here on the display menu that are handy, though. Let me show you one. Let me just zoom in with the keyboard and show you one that's kind of neat here is measure. What measure does, if you click on measure, I can click, let's say I want to find out how, what the distance from the windshield from this point to this point is. Simply click here, and then I drag. Whoops, looks like I released a little early there. So click and drag. And if you notice down the lower left-hand corner right here, it will show us the length. Just watch this window. And again, it shows us the length from wherever I started to wherever I drag. So it's a good, quick way to get sort of good measurements. Again, it's a little rough. You might not want to use it for exact things. Although, of course, if you zoomed in close enough, you could use it for exact things. But it's a nice way, aside from using the grid, to get a quick measurement on something. Now, another thing that you have in the display menu is options. And options is important. Options, keyboard shortcut, by the way, is D, since it's display options. This lets you choose a number of different things, such as one we already hinted at before. You can choose your unit system. If you want to be in English, in other words, inches and feet, rather than in metric or scientific, you can do that. By the way, the difference between scientific and metric is that scientific doesn't use centimeters, metric does. So just a choice whether you want centimeters or not. Otherwise, they're basically the same. So we will keep it, I'll keep it at metric. And then we've got other things such as different views we can choose between. The view that we're in normally is called logo view, and you can change to other different views. Although for most modeling jobs, by the way, I would just keep in one view. Until you get really, really, really comfortable with the program, there's absolutely no reason to change views. You can do almost anything you want to just in the regular views as they come to you. So again, there's reasons occasionally at a much, much more advanced level to start changing the views around, but it's nothing you need to do too much, especially at a basic level. So we'll just leave it at logo. We also have a choice of previews here, and this is what we see up in this fourth window. Right now we have none selected, and that's the way it defaults to, but we can set it, for instance, to a static preview, and that means it will show us the car. Let me just drag this window a little bit bigger. So it will show us the car, and we can kind of rotate this car around. The way we rotate it around is we either click outside of the sphere here and hold down the Alt key. And notice that moves us one way. It's like we're doing a pitch or something there. Or if we click inside the sphere, still holding down Alt and drag, you notice it's moving us another way. So again, we can rotate around within that. If we want to zoom in this view, just the comma and the period keys, which zoom in, of course, all three views. Or, let's go back to display options again for a second. We can also set up a moving preview, which is our choice of either wire or solid model. And the one that's really useful here is the solid moving preview. What this gives you is it gives you a representation of the object. And when it says solid, it does what's called hidden line removal, where if the back of the car, for instance, wouldn't be visible if you were looking at the front of it, because that part is hidden from you by the polygons in the front. Well, it doesn't show you those back polygons, so it looks like a solid object, and you can see that right over here. The object is moving around, looks solid. Now, there's no way to get a solid static preview. Any previews you get here are moving if it's a solid object. And again, if this moving preview up here starts making you a little seasick, then the sort of key is just shut it off. You don't need that view up there. It's just handy. And we'll show you a couple of other things of those views as we go along during this tape. All right, now that is basic movement, getting around, and some of the display options that are handy. Now let's start to talk about another very, very important function in Lightwave, and that's selecting things. And let me before we do that, clear out the car. And we'll use the New function under Objects, keyboard shortcut Shift-N. So Shift-N for New. It says, okay, we're going to lose everything, and hey, that's okay with us. We're going to lose everything. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up an object, and I will go to the Tutorials directory. This is another object that comes with your toaster. It's the NewTek logo. Now, when we're talking about selecting things, there's one important rule to note right up front, and that's that if nothing is chosen, if nothing is selected, then it's like everything is selected. And an example of this, let's go to another menu that we haven't seen yet. Let's go to the Modify menu. And if you're familiar with Lightwave, you'll recognize the first few things up here. Under Modify, you have Move, Rotate, Size, and Stretch. And again, these are like things you can do with objects in Lightwave. You can move them, rotate them, size them, or stretch them. But here it affects it on a permanent basis. So let's pick Move, and with nothing selected, everything is selected. We've not selected any individual part of the object, so when we do a Move, the whole thing moves. Same thing if we do a Rotate. Pick Rotate, the whole thing rotates. So the rule here is anytime you perform a function in Modeler, it performs it on whatever you have selected. Nothing chosen, it does it to the entire object. Now what we're going to do is show you how to select different parts of an object, and of course there are three selection tools that you see on the screen here. They're select by points, polygon, or volume. By the way, I'm going to reset the rotation here back to where it was by doing an undo. And undo undoes the last thing that you did, which in this case was the rotate. So undo gets rid of the rotate. You notice it's still moved up a little bit here, but we'll leave it like there for now. And let's talk about these functions here. We can select by point, polygon, or volume. Now the selection process for point and polygon is exactly the same. Once you get the basic mechanics of selecting points, it works just the same for polygons. So make sure you understand what we're doing here with points. Now the rule is, when you're trying to select points, with no points chosen, your mouse is in select mode. So right now I have nothing chosen. See, it says 0. So when I click on something, it becomes highlighted. And I'm still holding down the left mouse button. If I continue to hold it down, I can select multiple points. Now, it's picked a number of points here, but you'll notice it's also picked points along the back face as well. And that's because when we clicked on this front point, any of these, let's say here, it doesn't know whether we want the one in front or the one in back. Since this object has different points, one in front and one in back, it simply chooses them both, and it's up to us to deselect what we don't want. So, again, before we were in select mode. Once you have things chosen, though, you're in deselect mode. And that means if you try to click your mouse down on a point here, has no effect. I'm not selecting things now. It's because I'm in deselect. So now I just click, and again, if I hold down and drag, I can deselect multiple points. Now, if you want to select more points, if you want to select more, the keyboard shortcut for more in Modeler, in a couple different places, is holding down the Shift key. You hold down Shift, then click on what you want to choose, and it becomes highlighted. All the time I'm holding down the Shift key here. Now, let's go over that again, and let's show you also the way to deselect every point. You notice we have a whole bunch of points selected here. Two ways to deselect everything. One, I could click in a blank area, an area where there's no buttons, right here for instance. I click, everything becomes deselected. Or there's another way I could deselect things, and that's by hitting the backslash key. It's the key underneath the question mark here. And again, hitting that deselects everything. Now, let's select points again. Just quickly go over it. Nothing selected. I can click on it because I'm in select mode. Once I've selected anything, though, I am now in deselect. And if I want to click on more, that won't work. To select more, I have to hold down the Shift key, and that lets me pick more. Now, there's another way of selecting, which is with everything I've been doing so far is with the left mouse button. But I can also use the right mouse button, and that gives me a lasso selection tool. The way this works is I simply hold down the right mouse, and just like before, where after you've selected things, you're in deselect mode, right now with the lasso, I'm deselecting. If I want to select with the lasso, I simply hold down the Shift key, hold down the right mouse button, and now anything within this lasso becomes either selected or deselected, depending upon how you've got the Shift key held down. So those are your options for selecting things, and you'll see that the lasso, for reasons that we'll show you in a few minutes, can be very, very, very useful. Make sure you go over and understand these functions. One that's really important, of course, is that Shift allows you to select more. And also using that backslash key to quickly deselect points can be very handy. Now, let's go into polygons, which you'll see work just the same as points. So I'm going to go over it quickly here. We select polygon. By the way, another good keyboard shortcut here is the space bar, which moves you through point, polygon, exclude, or include. Just using the space bar moves you through those. So let's go to polygon, and again, nothing selected, everything selected. To start choosing, left mouse button. If we want to deselect, we just, again, click after we've already chosen stuff. To select more, hold down Shift, click on things, and the right mouse button is a lasso, which will either deselect or select, depending if the Shift key is held down or if it's the first thing that you're choosing. Now, this lasso, and particularly when we get into polygon selection, there's a number of things that can come in very, very handy, little tricks you can do with the lasso that can make your life much easier. And here's one of them. A common thing that you're trying to do is, let's first say, for instance, you got a logo. You want to pick just the front faces of that logo, just the front polygons. And why might you want to do that? Well, for instance, let's say you wanted to give the logo two different surface names. A matte color, like blue or red on the front, but then metallic sides. Well, here's the problem with that. Let me deselect everything to show you. If we click down here on face, which is the way you'd think, let's pick the faces, just the fronts. It's doing that. It's picking the fronts. You'll notice it's also picking the sides and the backs. So now we have to go up and deselect the sides and the backs. And this is no fun, because we can often accidentally deselect some of the front faces doing it that way. So there's a much better and more efficient way to do it using the lasso. And here's the idea. What we'll do is let's make the left view fairly big. And rather than clicking on the front faces, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the right mouse button and lasso the front faces. So I've got the front faces within the lasso. Now the side face is only partially selected. The thing to remember here is that anything that's only partially selected won't be selected at all. So we have the front faces chosen. We release. There we go. They're chosen. You want to pick the back faces, hold down Shift, click, lasso around them. So this works. It's a quick way to use the lasso to select things. Now what if we want to pick the side faces? Well, let me deselect everything. Here's one solution. Pick everything, then deselect the front and the back faces. All right, so this, again, it's a quick way to pick just the sides. And you'll see that the lasso gives you a few ways to do things like that. Now you see this is a quicker, easier way. Let me just show you, if you're terminally lazy, if you've lost the will to live, the easiest way to do it. It's an important way to see how lasso works. Let me deselect all the polygons here, slash key. Now one thing that you'll notice is that if we start a lasso, let's say here, and end up here, what it's going to do is it's going to draw a straight line from where we started to where we finished. And anything within that straight line will be chosen. That's what it's doing. And this is similar to the way it works in a paint program, where you start drawing, then you end up in another place. It often connects those with some kind of line. Well, that's the way this works. So how does this relate to terminal laziness? Well, watch. Rather than going through and drawing through this way, and this especially is handy when you've got something very thin, what we do is we click above it and then release below. And what it's going to end up doing is drawing a straight line from where we started to where we finished, and that selects. Want to pick more? Shift. Boom. That's another good, quick way to select things. Now, that's point and polygon. Let's talk about volume now. This is another one of those keys that throws people, but when you see how it works, it's very, very simple, really. Let's just deselect everything and make our windows large here. And we'll do an A for autofit. And let's just focus in on the N and the E here. What we're going to do is we click on volume, and you'll see the button changes its name. It becomes either exclude, or if you click on it again, include. Now the way volume works is instead of picking individual points or polygons, you're picking an area. We pick that area, we draw that area out by dragging out a box with our left mouse. So we draw the box out, and in this case you notice I've picked the N and part of the E. Now the rule here is very simple. If you're within the box, you're selected, the end. If you're completely inside the box, you are selected, end of story. The problem comes if something is partially selected. Again, inside the box, you're chosen. Outside the box, you're not chosen. Partially selected, what are you? Well, there's a choice, and that's why the button says either exclude or include. With exclude on, things that are partially selected, like the sides of our E here, are excluded from what's selected. So we have exclude on, these would not be chosen. And you'll see that, for instance, let's do one of the operations down here, cut, copy, and paste. Let's do a cut operation. Now remember, with nothing selected, everything's chosen. But once you start picking stuff, cut will now affect whatever we have chosen. And in this case, just the N is chosen. So we do a cut. The N goes away, but you'll see it leaves the E. All right? Now let's undo that to bring it back. Keyboard shortcut for undo, by the way, is U. Now let's pick include. Now with include chosen, anything that is partially selected is included in what's chosen. So in other words, exclude means if you're partially chosen, you're excluded from what's selected. Include means if you're partially chosen, you're included in what's selected. And what's going to happen here now is we do a cut, and it cuts away the N and the E. Or did it? Let's take a look here. The sharp-eyed amongst you, and if you're not sharp-eyed, just take a look right now because I'm pointing it out. See what's left here? See, we have the sides of the E, the side parts of the E. Those weren't cut out at all. Now, why weren't those cut out? Just what I said before. It's exactly the way I explained it. If you are inside that box, you're chosen. If you're outside, you're not. If you're partially selected, you may or may not be. Well, what was the status of the sides of the E? And the answer is they weren't chosen at all. Take a look. Here's our box. They're nowhere near inside it. So they weren't chosen, so they were not cut away. Now, if you see that point, you'll see a more subtle and insidious point that we skipped over, something that a lot of people wouldn't notice, and this is a point you need to see conceptually. Let me just undo what we did and go back to exclude. I'm going to cut this away, and now ask yourself, what was cut away? Well, the N was cut away, but take a look. What else was cut? Well, this side of the E. These polygons on the sides of the E, they were cut as well. And this is very, very dangerous, because if you do not understand how this works, you will end up taking large gouging chunks out of your logos, which does not tend to impress the client or make you any happier at 3 in the morning when your hair is being pulled out. So you have to watch out for this, because this can really mess up your objects if you don't understand the way it works. If you're inside the box, you're chosen. If you're not chosen. Partially selected may or may not be. But you need to watch out, because something like the sides of the E here are completely within the box. And let me just give you a little homework assignment here. I'll just move myself over. And this is just a danger thing here. Let's say I decide I want to pull the T out of this letter. So I draw a box around it. If I got exclude chosen, what's it going to cut away? Well, the answer is it's going to cut away the T and this top of the W, this side, 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 all the sides of the E here. You can't see it from here, although you can see it a little bit from the top. See how the lines vanish there? But this is very, very dangerous, so be careful about how you use include and exclude. All right, let me undo what we just did and show that we also have a right mouse button lasso here. Hold down right mouse button in exclude or include. And now, of course, just what's inside the lasso area here will be included or excluded. So we'll do a cut. See, that picks just the T. These are this kind of mushroom cloud looking thing too. But that can go away just as we make anything else go away. You click in the blank area or hit the backslash key. All right? So this is include and exclude, again, very important selection tools. Now, there's another couple of selection tools that are just as important, I think, in some ways. One of them which is new to 3.0 and 4000, so let's take a look at those. But the basic selections, point, polygon, and volume, are the ones you use most often. Let's take a look at the other ones, though. First one is select connected. And the way that works is, let's say you choose one polygon in this T here. You pick part of it. You want to pick all of them. If you hit the close bracket key here on your keyboard, close bracket key will pick every polygon that's connected to whatever ones you have selected. And so this is very, very handy, for instance, if you're trying to pick all of the polygons of one object, but you can only get access neatly to one of them. You just pick that one, hit the close bracket key. It's the key 2 keys over from the P key, and that will choose everything that's connected to the polygon that you have chosen there. It's very, very handy. Now, the other one that's helpful is the statistics function. Keyboard shortcut inexplicably is W for statistics. No answer for you there. It's so weird that you remember it, though. So maybe think of it as weird. This is a really weird keyboard shortcut. W. So what statistics does, by the way, the way to bring it up without the keyboard shortcut, which is not what you want to do, is you go to the display menu and you see it says selection stats. By the way, here's select connected as well. You see you have that as well. So let's take a look at that. The way the statistics works is it changes whether you have point, polygon, or volume chosen. If we have a point chosen right down here, and we don't even have to have any points themselves chosen, we hit W, it brings up point statistics, shows us how many points there are in the object, and how many points are zero polygon points, 1 polygon, so on and so forth. Now, point statistics isn't that useful. There are some uses for it, but not that come up a lot. The other one that's not that useful is when you have volume chosen, W brings up volume statistics. It shows us how many points or polygons are inside the selected volume or outside. And the important thing to note is both of these buttons, both of these requesters so far have had these plus and minus buttons. Let's take a look at the real payoff requester here, polygon, W. You see this has it too. Now what plus and minus stand for there is select or deselect. Remember, these are selection tools. They not only give you statistics about the object, but they also let you choose parts of an object. And the one that's very, very handy is right here in polygon statistics. And let's skip all this and move right down to this line here, where it says plus or minus, in other words, select or deselect. 0, that's how many polygons, have the surface name, in other words, with surface, default. So in this case, I could select all 0 polygons with a surface name default. That wouldn't be very useful. So what I'll do is click on this bar, and it shows me all of the surface names I currently have loaded up, which are blue bar, green bar, NTN fonts, and red bar. And let me just pick blue bar and hit plus. And what you'll see is it selects all of the surfaces that have the name blue bar. And this is a very, very handy way to sort of pull objects apart. These were given these surface names by the person who created the model. And so when you create your models, as you'll see, you create them with surface names. This is a good way, for instance, try taking the Porsche apart. If you load it up, you'll be able to see that there are about a dozen or so surface names in there, and you can pull off just the windshields or anything you want. So you can quickly select just what you want there. Okay? Another useful selection tool. There's one other selection tool that's handy, and again, it's in the display menu. It's select by info. And keyboard shortcut is I for info. And what info does, when we hit that, let me just hit I, it brings up info around polygons or points. In this case, it shows you, now again, it shows it on an individual basis. So polygon info, it's a face. It's got 4 points in it. Its surface is called blue bar, and it's flat. If we hit next, it shows us we got another polygon that's virtually the same. In fact, All our polygons here are pretty much the same. But you'll notice deselect, what that does is it will deselect one of the faces. Now in this case, let's see if we can try to figure out which one. Looks like probably one. It looks like the bottom one here. Now there's not a real way of being able to tell which one is which. So this has a fairly limited use. Where this is handy for is if you have two polygons that are exactly sharing the same face and you want to deselect them. The problem is since they're in exactly the same location, you can't pick them separately. So what you need to do is pick both of them, then deselect one. That's one of the big uses for it. And again, it's a utility feature that we just mentioned now for purposes of completeness. The ones you use all the time, though, are point, polygon, volume. Statistics comes up quite a bit, and that select connected can come in quite handy as well. All right, now let's talk about another crucial feature to understanding Lightwave Modeler, and that's these buttons up here, the different layers. You notice there are 8 different buttons up here, and they correspond to 8 different layers in Lightwave Modeler. Now the way to think of a layer is like a workspace, and you can load different objects or create different objects in the layers, and later combine them in a number of different ways. Now each layer can be in one of 3 possible states. So let's talk about selecting layers, the keyboard shortcuts for that, and the 3 possible states a layer can be in. Now first off, to just select a layer as the main or active layer. It's also sometimes called the foreground layer. And I don't like the terms foreground and background for reasons I'll explain in a little bit. But I use the term active and inactive. But active means foreground, inactive means background. To select a layer as an active layer, the way you do it is you click on the top button. So right now, layer 1 is active. If I click on the top button of layer 2, it becomes chosen. The keyboard shortcut for selecting an layer as active is you hit the number keys, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8, and they bring up the layer that corresponds to that number. To bring up layer 5, hit the number 5. Couldn't be much simpler, really. Now, a layer is, again, as we said before, one of 3 possible states. It's either on and active, or it's off. So right now, based on those 2 states, layer 5 is on and active. All the other layers are off. You'll see a dot up here for layer 1, and that just means that there is something in layer 1. If we click on layer 1 or hit its key, that something is the NewTek logo. Whenever a layer's got something in it, points, polygons, anything, it shows up as a little dot on the top button of that layer, which is quite handy. Now, 3 states, on and active, off, or on and in the background. So let me just load up 3 objects. And what I'm going to do is, because in order to see the background layer, it helps to be able to have multiple objects. So let me just use the options we've seen so far. Go to 3 different layers and load up an object into each one of them. I'm going to go to the second layer and load up from the tutorials directory the butterfly body. Again, we can't see it's fairly small, so we'll use the A key to fit it in. Then we'll go to layer 3, and we will load up the wing. Right butterfly wing. And let's go to layer 4 and load up the left butterfly wing. So now what we have is we have the different parts of the butterfly in 3 different layers. But don't forget, we've also got the NewTek logo back in layer 1. Let's just recap what we've got here. In layer 1, there's the NewTek logo. You're seeing it the way it is now because we're zoomed in. If you're zoomed in really close, for instance, our grid is 1 centimeter. In one layer, your grid is the same on all layers. Doesn't make any difference. You notice the grid isn't changing. On layer 2, here's the butterfly body. On layer 3, there's one wing, and on layer 4, we have another. Now, we've seen on and active and off. Let's show you on and passive. And the way you make a layer on and inactive or passive is by clicking on the bottom button of that layer. So I'm going to click on the bottom button of layer 3. Keyboard shortcut for that would be Alt-3. Hold down the Alt key, hit a layer, it comes up as inactive. And what you see is we can see the layer in the background, but it's passive, it's inactive. There's nothing we can do to affect it. Remember, with nothing selected, it's like everything is selected. So if I were, for instance, to do a rotate right now, it's going to affect what? Well, in this case, just this wing here, the one that's in white. Since this wing is on a layer that's active, layer 4, and this wing is on a layer that's inactive, the inactive layer is not affected in any way. We do a rotate, it doesn't affect the other wing. Now, let me undo that. Let me show you that you can also make multiple layers active or inactive. To make more than one layer active, you hold down the Shift key. And remember, the Shift key was also used to select more. Again, same function here. Shift just means pick more. So Shift, then the layer, makes it active in addition to whatever layers are active already. By the way, you always need at least one layer active. You can't have no active layers. So I hold down Shift, click on 3. Both of those layers are now active. Let me make the body visible in the background. So to do that, click on the bottom button, and that makes it an inactive layer. Now, by the way, the reason I don't like the terminology foreground and background, this is an important distinction here, is that when you use the term foreground or background, to me that connotes some kind of physical relationship between things. For instance, I'm sitting in the foreground, in the background we have this TV set. Now, when you're dealing with layers, that's not really what it means. In other words, it really has nothing to do with the 3D relationship between things. If we were using the example of me and the television set, I could be in a background layer, the TV could be in the foreground layer, but technically I'd still be in front of the TV. So again, the term background and foreground doesn't mean that much here. Really what we're talking about is active, it can be affected, or inactive, it can't be. All right? And what you'll see we have here, though, is 2 active layers, 1 inactive. And again, if we do a rotate, the wings will be affected, but the body won't. If we wanted to affect all of them, we'll just pick all of them. I'll hold down Shift, click Layer 2. Now they're all selected. Let me rotate the whole thing here, whole butterfly. And what you'll notice is, when we go back to the individual layers, the individual parts have been rotated. In other words, we did this sort of temporary alliance. We temporarily grouped things together, rotated them, and that had an effect on all the 3 layers. They're still independent. They're still individual now, even though we moved them as a group. Now, you can also have multiple background layers, multiple inactive layers. And the way you do that is you hold down the Alt key. Remember, that's the keyboard shortcut for picking multiple background layers. Hold down Shift and pick the number. So by clicking on 3 and 4, we select multiple backgrounds. That's the keyboard shortcut method. If you don't want to use the keyboard shortcut, all you do is just hold down Shift and click on the bottom button, and that selects things as multiple backgrounds. Now, there's another keyboard shortcut here that's pretty handy, and let me just get myself in a position where the body is selected as the active layer and the wings are selected as the inactive layers. So the body's on layer 2. I'll hit the 2 button. And the wings are on layers 3 and 4, so Alt-Shift 3, Alt-Shift 4. And there's a key that's very handy for switching quickly between active and inactive layers. In other words, making active layers inactive, inactive layers active. And that's the quote key right next to the colon/semicolon key. If I hit quote, you notice what was active is now inactive and vice versa. So you see the way it works there. Just switches between them. That's the quote key. Now, a few things about this. First off, whenever you save an object, what it saves is the foreground layers. In other words, the active layers. Right now, if we were to go and do a save, it would save just the wings. So if we were to save this, now let me just do it, and we will call this butterfly 1. Hit OK. And now, again, what it saved is it saved just the wings. Now let's make all 3 layers active. Let's, in fact, rotate this back to its original position, too. Or as near to it as we can get without spending a lot of time. That's pretty near to it right there. That's nearer. So we'll just go to Save As, and we'll save this as Butterfly 2. By the way, instead of typing in Butterfly all again, what I'll just click on Butterfly 1, go to the end, erase the 1 and replace it with the 2. Just, again, a degree in advanced laziness helps you here. You don't need to retype in stuff. Just click on it and add a new suffix or prefix to it. That'll work. Now, we saved 2 versions. Butterfly 1 is the wings at an angle but without the body. The reason it didn't save the body is because that was in an inactive layer. This version, though, all 3 layers are active, so it's going to save all 3 versions. Now, it's going to save, all 3 parts of this as one object. So let's go into Layout here and load up those 2 things. We'll go to Tutorials. We'll load up Butterfly 1 first. Well, let me go to the top view, and you'll see just what you'd expect. There's the 2 wings, no body, at an angle. Now, on the other hand, if we load up Butterfly 2, Let me just separate it here. Object. There's a butterfly with the body. The wings are all part of it. You notice, by the way, when we move it, they're all as one. If we wanted the wings to flap separately now, we really couldn't do that. By the way, that's why the wings are not part of the object normally. We can save it this way if, for instance, we wanted the butterfly as part of a collection. We wanted it to look like it was pinned up or something. But if you're going to have the butterfly with the moving wings, you'd want them as three separate objects, so the wings have an independent movement from the body, basically. Now, if you see the way saving works here, you pick what you want in the foreground, and you save it. I use save as the first time I'm saving something, of course, so I give it a fresh name. If you see this idea, there's another thing that's really important to understand. It's that the concept of layers has absolutely no meaning in Lightwave. These were saved as part of 3 different layers, but now it's just considered one object. And once something is saved as an object, layers no longer have any meaning whatsoever in Lightwave Modeler either. Let me show you what I mean. Let's go back to Modeler, and let me clear out everything. I'll do a new, and then I will load up Butterfly 2. Now remember, when I saved this, we had the body on layer 2, one wing on layer 3, and another wing on layer 4. Now it loads it up just into regular old layer 1 here, and they're all attached. It's because once you save something from Modeler, the layers no longer make any difference. Now, you might think it's useful, for instance, to be able to save an object with the layers kept intact. And it would be. For instance, at a later time, you might want to be able to go back in and just have those things separate. And there's a way you can do that within Modeler. So let me show you how to save something with the layers intact. But before I do this, I want to point out that the thing saved with the layers intact is only useful to you in Modeler. You will not be able to load the object we're going to save here into Lightwave. But this is a real handy thing to be able to do sometimes, because you'll be putting together an object, and you've got a whole bunch of things laid out on different layers. Now you have to shut down the machine to go sleep or eat or something that gets in the way of working with Lightwave. Well, what do? Well, here's what you do. So let me clear out everything again. I'm going to load up the 3 parts of the butterfly. Body, go to layer 2, left wing, go to layer 3, right wing. And again, here's what we got, layer 1, 2, and 3. So let's say we wanted to save this as part of a project to bring this up later in the layers that they're in. What you do is you select all the layers that you want as active layers. So Shift 1, 2, and 3. All the layers are active now. And I'm going to click on Save As, but I'm going to hold down Alt. I'm going to press and hold down the Alt key before I click on Save As. And then I will save this as butterfly.mod, M-O-D in big letters. Now, you don't need to put in .mod, but the reason I do it is it reminds me that I can't load this up in Lightwave. It's just a modeler thing. Hit OK. Done. All I'm doing is I'm just holding down the Alt key. Now, let me just prove my point here. I go to Load Object, butterfly.mod. Can't do it. It says it doesn't recognize the object type. That's normal. However, in Modeler, we clear out everything. Load butterfly.mod, and you notice, by the way, before I load it, there's nothing in any of the layers, are completely empty. Hit load though, butterfly.mod, and hey, take a look. Layer 1, 2, and 3, and it's on the individual parts here. So this is a good quick way to save projects from within Modeler. Hold down the Alt key and press on Save. Now, this is the basics of layers, and you'll see we'll be using layers in a number of cases. Some of the tools, in fact, in Lightwave, such as the Boolean tool or Rail Extrude, you need to use layers. So make sure you understand what the layers and see how they work. The important things are you have 3 different positions, active, inactive, or off. You can select multiple layers as either active or inactive layers. And whenever you save something, it saves whatever you have as active layers when it saves the object. And from then on, the object is bound together. Or hold down Alt when you click on Save As, and you can save a modeler project. That's what you need to know about layers. Now let's go back into the program and talk about another very, very important topic here. The next concept we want to talk about is the concept of a pivot point. And this is a really important concept for working with Lightwave and with Modeler. Now you set the pivot point in Modeler, and the pivot point is just a hinge point. And the pivot point is wherever these darker lines, these double lines or dark lines, converge. Right now the pivot point of this object is right here. And again, the way I think of this is as a hinge almost. Think of it as a door hinge. the place you put the hinge is obviously important to which way the door opens, you know. If you have a doorway, you put the hinge on the top, you've got a doggy door. Put it on the side, you've got a regular human door. You know, put it on the bottom, you've got like a moat entrance or something. So the idea here is the pivot point does make a difference. That's the point around which it will rotate. Now, the way you set the pivot point is really simple. You just move the object, use move, wherever you want it to be. And if we move the object, let's move it, right about here, let's say. So that the tail is at the pivot point. Let me save this. Shift S is the keyboard shortcut for save as. So you'll see I'll be using that pretty frequently. Let's just save this as Butterfly 3, another clever name on my part, and hit OK. Let's exit back to layout and clear out the whole scene here, just so we're starting from scratch. And let's load up that Butterfly 3. And what you'll notice is because we moved the tail to where those dark lines were, when we pick the object and rotate it, it rotates around this tail point here. And you see that where let's go to the front view here. You'll see this dot in the middle, that's the pivot point right there. This shows you where the pivot point is. Now, in Lightwave layout, you can move the pivot point. Of course, if we move the pivot point, it tells you should change the rotation scale back to normal before you move it. So let's do that. Let's go to rotate, hit reset, and the top view here. You notice we can move the pivot point from within Lightwave. Now, even though you can do that, generally, if you know where you want the pivot point of an object to be, set it there in Modeler. In other words, when you set it in Modeler, it's a permanent change to the object. And if you don't set it there, you're going to have to reset your pivot point every time you load the object, which is about as much fun as it sounds. So do the right thing here. Set the pivot point properly in Modeler. Then when you bring it into Lightwave, you don't have to go through this. But I'm just showing you, you can move the pivot point around from within Lightwave layout, move it down here to the corner. Now the object rotates around that point. So again, it's really the point of rotation there. Now, most often in an object, you'll want the pivot point to be right at the center of the object. This is especially true with text, logos, anything like that. And there's a quick way to center up text, and it uses a macro. This is the first time we'll be talking about another important concept, which are the macros in Lightwave Modeler. Tremendously useful. What macros are is they're basically little computer programs or functions that do things that require work much quicker than if you had actually do the work yourself. And again, a lot of the key here in both Lightwave and Modeler is what I call sort of intelligent laziness. What you want to do is you want to do as little work as possible to get a good-looking result, because then you get the check faster, you get paid quicker. And if you can do something faster, by all means do it that way. Modeler macros help you do things quicker. Now, the way you access the macros is from the Objects menu. Go to the Objects menu, hold down Macro. Again, it's got one of these up and down little arrow combinations. So it means we hold it down, and this shows us a list of the macros that come with the program. Now, you will have a list somewhat like this on your system. All these buttons below where it says these things that are in the little arrows here, all the things below here are macros. And the first one to talk about is center. What center will do is it will take whatever you have chosen, in this case nothing, so the whole butterfly, and it automatically centers it on all three axes, X, Y, and Z. What that means is we have the object up here and over to one side. All we have to do is, let me back out. Again, you see here's where the darker lines are. All we have to do is go to Macro, hit Center, there we go. Now, if we hold on the Macros key, though, you'll see that we have up here Configure List, Configure Keys, and Direct Command. And the one I want to focus your attention for right now is Configure Keys. What Configure Keys does is it lets you assign macros to the function keys, the F1 through F10 keys, and it lets you basically make your own keyboard shortcuts. Now, you can assign any macro as a keyboard shortcut, and there's a few that are already assigned for you. If you've installed the Toaster software, the F1 key is the center macro, and the F2 key is the center 1D macro. And we'll show you how you can assign other things as macros here. Let me just show you the idea. We don't have anything for F10. We click on the button next to it, and we will pick one of the more useless macros, but it's kind of interesting, called Dinner. And what Dinner does is it gives you a list of restaurants in Topeka, Kansas, that you can pick where you're going to go to dinner if you're ever in Topeka. And this is something that the programmers did because it's very hard to get a meal in Topeka. Well, by assigning it to the F10 key, see F10 is now dinner. Whenever I hit F10, it brings up this list and suggests Paisanos, which now has free advertising on these tapes that they don't even know about. So this is the idea. We can assign a macro to a key and then just by hitting the key access it. Now dinner might not be one that you want to assign to your keys. On the other hand, center is already assigned at F1, and it's a good place for it because you use it all the time. Let me also show you what center 1D does, because that's handy. If I pick an object and I move it somewhere, let's say I just want it centered left to right, or on the x-axis, I hit either center 1D or F2, which is the keyboard shortcut, and I can pick one axis, X, Y, or Z, and so now it's exactly centered left to right. So that's, again, another very, very handy thing to use. So there's a couple macros, and these let us set our pivot points the way we want them. Now, of course, you can also set the pivot point wherever you want it. And as you'll see a little bit later in the tape, there are reasons sometimes you want the pivot point even off the object entirely. So this is an intro to macros and talking a little bit about pivot points. Now, the things that we've shown you, the selection tools, moving around the views, using the layers, and the concept of pivot points, all of these things are really, really important concepts that will come up fairly constantly in Lightwave Modeler. Now that we've got those basics out of the way, we want to start showing you how to create your own objects in Lightwave. But before we do that, let me just show you a couple of other things using some tools that we've seen already here, and we'll keep with the butterfly example that we have. And the last thing I want to show you here is cut, copy, and paste. We've already shown you cut a little bit. I just want to show you can use cut, copy, and paste to move things between different layers. Here's an example. I'm going to make it, let me just make layer 2 and hold on Shift and 3 selected. So right now we have just the wings without the body. Now I'm going to do first a cut. What cut does is it removes whatever you have selected, points, polygons, volumes, any of that. Now in this case we had nothing selected, so it cut away everything. We saw this earlier with the volume example, by the way. Now what we're going to do is we've got the wings cut away. Where are they cut to? Well, they're cut to a buffer. They're cut to a temporary storage space. And they're ready now to be pasted somewhere else. Cut actually removes them from the layers. And if we were to go over to layer 8, for instance, do a paste, you'll see the whatever we had cut there, in this case the active layers, the wings, were cut away and now pasted to layer 8. Now they were on 2 separate layers before, now they're on the same layer, so they've been joined really. And again, this is one way you can use cut, copy, and paste to combine different things. Now there's another feature you have, which is copy. Cut, you'll notice, puts it to a buffer, but it takes away what's there. Copy just puts it to the buffer. So let's show you that. We'll pick layer 8, hold down Shift and click layer 1. We'll do a copy. Now let's go to layer 2 and do a paste. And you'll see it takes the body and the wings and paste them both into layer 2. So notice that this works. Cut, copy, and paste work between the layers. And you'll see we'll use that quite a bit. There's one other keyboard shortcut here that you don't have access to from the menu. That's the delete function. If you want to get rid of something, you might not want to use cut, because remember, cut puts it into a buffer. That can slow things down. Just use delete, which is the Z key on your keyboard. The Z key. By the way, the keyboard shortcuts for cut, copy, and paste are X, C, and V. And if these seem familiar to you, it might be because these are used on most word processors. Cut, X for scissors, C for copy, and V for paste. And if that strikes you as a little strange, one way to think of it is, if you do any copy editing, of course, the V is the insert mark in copy editing. So that's one possible explanation as why you're using that for paste. It's because it's an insert mark. My explanation is that Z, X, C, and V are all convenient to the spacebar. They're all close right in there, so they work together. But, you know, if you need some rationale for keyboard shortcuts, that's a pretty good one for V. Still working on one for that W key, though. I haven't come up with that one yet. Now, the important thing to notice about all these selection tools is, and it's unfortunate, it's the way Modeler works, is I have to go through all of this, these basic things. But some of the things that we've covered already, particularly if you're new to the program, this can be overwhelming. There's a lot of material here. Also, to explain later concepts, the stuff we cover on the rest of this tape and the second tape in the series, you have to understand these basic concepts. But you might not get the reason. Like, okay, you see you can cut and copy, you see you can use layers, but why do you use them? Well, that's what the rest of the tape is about. So one thing you might want to do, since you have a videotape, is after you've watched this tape once, sit down, play with it, then go back and re-watch this beginning part again. After you start making your own objects a little bit, there's a lot of things in this first part that we've covered that you will have just forgotten, and that's okay. It's why you have a videotape. Go back, watch it again to make sure you pick up on that. Now, with these basic tools under our belt, let's start making objects. Let's start making our own objects. And to do that, let's start by clearing out the project entirely. Again, we go Shift-N for New, and we are back to scratch here. And I want to show you the easiest object you can possibly make in Lightwave, and this will introduce, in a sort of step-by-step way, a whole bunch of points here. So we're going to start by making a point, just a single point. Let's show you how to do that. We'll go to the Polygon menu and go to Create Points. We click on that, and then we put our crosshairs down, and we can move it around any of these views. We haven't made anything yet, though. To actually make a point, you click the Make button, not surprisingly either, or you use the keyboard shortcut, which is the Return key, or you use the mouse shortcut, which is the right mouse button. So the Return key, or the right mouse button, or the Make button will all do a make. And Make is one of those keys that you'll see comes up quite a bit. It actually comes up all over the place in Lightwave Modeler. So same thing applies anywhere you have Make. Return key, right mouse button, or hit the Make button. So I'll hit the Return key here. And when I click in the blank area here to get rid of the crosshairs will stay up. Here is our point. This is the simplest object you can make in Lightwave. It's a single point. Now we can actually save this as an object. It's not visible, and what we've made here is a null object. The thing is, a point itself is not visible. You cannot possibly see it. In order for it to be visible, you have to turn it into a polygon. So we've seen creating points. Let's now make a more complex object. Let's make a single point that's a polygon. And the way you convert points into polygons is by hitting the P key. All right, the P key converts any points you have selected into a polygon. So we hit P, and now we have a single point polygon. And let's save this, and let's give it the name particle, because that's what this is. Single point polygon is called a particle. Now let's exit out to layout so you can see how this will look. We'll clear out the scene that we have here. Load up the particle object. And important question to ask yourself at this point is, how big is this object? And the answer is, it is no big. In other words, it has no size whatsoever. It's just a point. It has no dimension. So how will it render? Answer, as a little tiny dot. And let me show you that. So we go to camera view. Let's pick object, and particle is the only thing we've got loaded. We'll move it out into the distance a little bit. We'll move it up. See that little X there? That's our particle. Return twice to keyframe it into place. And then let's go to camera, low res, just so it renders quickly. And I'll hit F9 to render it. And let's watch our program monitor as this renders out. Do not adjust your set. See that little dot up there in the sort of upper middle position? That's the particle. Now, watch what happens if I take the particle and move it way off in the distance. I'm going to move it way off into the distance. If you look at our position, it's now about 50 meters off in the distance. Before it was only a couple. I'll move it off even further. It's now about 100 meters off. Move it up a little bit. Keyframe it. Let's re-render that. And again, watching the program monitor, no difference. It's exactly the same. Important point about single point polygons or particles. They always render exactly the same way. You could move this particle right up to the front of the camera and it's going to look exactly the same. That's because literally it has no size. Now, I told you one question to ask yourself is, how big is this object? But the question you might be asking yourself now is, why do I care about this? And here's why. First off, we've seen a couple of principles here. How to make points, how to turn them into polygons. We'll be using that a lot. But these particle objects actually have a number of uses in Lightwave. One of them is for the stars object. If you go to the space directory, the random stars or actual stars objects are all these single point polygons. No matter how close you get to them, and they will always render the same way. Also, if you look at effects on the toaster, such as the snow effect or the star warp effect, either of those are particles. The snow effect, for instance, is putting particles, and they're just being animated. So there are actually some uses for this, but the main thing I want to show you is that since it has no dimension, we've just made this one point a polygon, you can't see it. And it raises another point, too, that I think is very, very important. A polygon in Lightwave, what's the definition of a polygon? Well, my definition is a polygon's a visible surface. This surface has no size whatsoever, and so it's not like you need a bunch of points connected. This is one point that's a polygon, but it's a visible surface. It's something that we can see. And if we look at our objects menu here, you'll notice under objects it tells us that we have 1 point and 1 polygon loaded, and that is our particle object. So this shows us what a polygon is. It's a visible object. Now let me head back into Modeler here, and let me draw 2 points now. So we'll do point, point. I'm just using the right mouse button to make them instantly. And now I'll hit P. Remember, that will join the points. And now we've made a much more complex object. This is a line. So we'll save this as line. Let me render this up, load it, and show it to you. Now you notice the line has height, but what does it have for thickness? It has no thickness. It literally is infinitely thin. Therefore, if we were to render this now, you'll see it shows up with some height, but it shows up as a very, very thin line. Now, if we move it back into the distance, and this is acting like a particle in this way, we move it back into the distance, its height will change, but it's still infinitely thin, so it's going to render with the same thickness, as you see right here. The point is, with this line, no matter how far away we get from it or how close we get to it, it will always be the same thickness. And again, what do you use this for? Well, a number of things, actually. You can use these to make fields of grass, or to create pine needles on a Christmas tree, to do any number of things. But again, it's just showing you, you connect 2 points, you get a polygon, a visible surface, and in this case, it's a 2-dimensional one. Now, this isn't very thrilling, so let's go in and create a real, sort of more regular object. And we'll just clear out our scene here, and head back into Modeler. And let's just erase what we have here, using Z to erase it. And now let's make 3 points. 1, 2, 3. And hit P, and it will connect them in the order we drew them, 1, 2, 3. And now we're talking something real here. We have an actual shape, and we've connected this to a polygon. And we will save this as nacho chip, because, you know, I'm hungry. So you can give it any name you want. Looks kind of like a nacho chip to me, and it's my damn tape. So let's just center this up. And again, I want this with the right pivot point. So we'll hit F1, centers it up. And let's resave it, because I saved it before I centered it. That won't do any good. Just resave it with the name nacho chip. Now, by the way, I didn't have to actually hit save as there. I could have just hit save, and would have said, OK to save foreground layers as nacho chip. So another way to do it. Regular S instead of Shift S is save. Now let's load this nacho chip object up. And you will see one thing that's interesting about it as it renders. We'll go to the camera view. We'll go to camera, low res, hit F9 to render, and watch this. We're not seeing anything. Now, there's a reason we're not seeing anything, and let me show you how we can actually see this object. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the object over. So I go back to layout, pick object, rotate, flip the thing over, keyframe it in place, and now watch. Here we go. Here's our object. Now, why could we see it from one side and not the other side? Well, that's because this brings up another very, very important point about objects in Lightwave, which is all polygons, all visible surfaces in Lightwave, have a direction. They face either one way or another. Now, this, of course, does not apply to particles since they have no dimension whatsoever. But once you start getting an object like this, the polygons face either one way or another. Which way is this one facing? Well, there's a way we can find out. We can go to Modeler, and if we go into the Modeler program and select this as a polygon, so I pick Polygon and choose it, you see this little line that's coming out of it. This shows us which way it's facing. And remember what we talked about folding these view overs? You can see that this is facing towards the back. Pretend the view is folding down that way. It's facing towards the back. Now, if we don't like the way a polygon's facing, we can use the flip function. Flip flips the polygon. It makes it face another way. And it works on whatever you have selected. Keyboard shortcut for flip is F. And you notice the line is now facing the other dimension. Hit F again, it faces the other way. Or under the polygon menu, you can hit the key, cleverly labeled flip down here, and it does the same thing. But I use F because it's a little quicker. Now, this is one thing. You can flip the polygon and make it face one way or another. But what if you want to see the polygon from either side? Well, what you would do then is I would actually use a surface function. I tend not to create polygons as double-sided in Lightwave ever. There's a number of problems you can get into when you start creating double-sided polygons. Let me show you how you would do this, though, and you would do it not in Modeler but in Surfaces. Let's exit out to Lightwave Layout, go to the Surfaces menu, and down here in the corner there's a surface button called Double-Sided. If we pick that, now here's the nacho chip from one side. See, it's rendering. Or flip it around. Keyframe it in place so we hold it there. And here it is from the other side. So now it's visible from either side. Now again, that's using the double-sided option in Surfaces. Now, another good question here, particularly if you're new to the program, well, why doesn't it just make them face both ways? And the reason is because that would be a needless use of extra polygons. Basically, think about most objects you create. Let's say a logo. Generally, you will never get inside that logo. Now, I know as soon as I say that, your mind starts thinking, well, what if I want to get inside the logo? Don't worry about that for right now. The point is, you usually don't. Usually you stay outside an object. If it's a football logo, you see the football fly by, you see the words fly by. You never get like inside the football or anything. Because of that, you only need to see the outside-facing polygons of that object. And if the computer was rendering the inside ones, the render time would slow down needlessly. You're not buying anything for your increased render time there. So that's why polygons face a certain way. The key thing to know is you want them to face the way you want them to face. Now, most objects you create, the polygons will face outwards automatically. But you occasionally will have an object that's rendering inside out. I would generally tend to use flip to fix that problem. I would not just turn on double-sided anytime you have a problem, because again, now you're suddenly doubling the number of polygons it's rendering, and you're not really buying much there. Okay, that's the concept of polygon facing, and you've seen that you can connect points to form a polygon. We did it with 3 points, but as I'll show you here, you can do it with any number of points you want, really. Just head back into Modeler, and I will make a bunch of points. Hit P. There they are joined. Now, also, if we were to go and make these points in some kind of order like this, notice I'm doing it in a very definite order here. Then I hit P. For instance, there's an L, or an angle type thing, but I meant it to be an L. Now, if I connect these points in a different way, for instance, if I draw them like this, point, 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 point. You notice we've got the same basic shape here, but points are connected in the order that you select them in or create them in. So if we hit P now, we get a horrible, deathly mess. So don't do that. Basically, draw points in the order you want them selected in. Now, you can also do this by selecting points. For instance, let me just delete everything here, and I'll make a couple points. And then what you'll notice is, if I don't like the order I selected them in here, I can always deselect all the points. So I click on point, hit the backslash key, or click in a blank space, so none are selected. Then go back and pick them in an order I like. I'll go point, 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 P. So those were connected into one polygon. Now I'll go point, 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 just selecting these in order, and hit P. Here's a second polygon. So you can create multiple polygons by doing it this way, or you can just select them in any order to create polygons. Now, if this was the only way you had to create objects, by drawing points out individually, you would kill yourself. There was no way you would ever model this way. And so what Lightwave gives you is a number of tools to make your life easier. And these are called primitives. Before I get into the primitives, though, I want to show you a couple of other ways that you can connect these points. I just don't want you to think this is the only way to do it, though. There's another couple of tools, and we won't get into all of the ramifications of these tools in this tape, but for the purposes of completeness in this tape, I want to show you that there's ways to do that now. So let me just draw out 3 points. And instead of hitting P, I'm going to hit Control P. And what this will do is it will connect these things into a curve. Point, point, point. And it's an actual curve shape, and you notice it didn't close it. This is an open curve or a spline. Now I can also connect these into a closed curve. And the way I do that is I select my points or draw them out, and then I hit Control O. And the way you can remember Control O, for instance, is an O is a closed curved figure. So this creates a closed curved figure, just like you're seeing here. Now, these are curves, which means if we select a point and then use, for instance, the move function, it moves it around, still drawing curves between these different points here. Now, a quicker way to do this is to use the drag function. What drag does, instead of selecting a point, then going to move, deselecting it, selecting another point, going to move. When you have drag selected, you just click and drag on a point, and it pulls it where you want to. And so we can create things, for instance, like, a guitar pick, which is what this looks like to me. Now, we've created this closed curve object. Let's save this, again, with a clever name like pick. Exit into Lightwave. I guess really this could be a more technically advanced nacho chip if you think about it, but I'll go with my first instinct and keep it pick. Let's take a look at this pick object. You notice it's 3 points, but no polygons. These curves are not polygons, they are curved surfaces. And this means something very important. We're not going to see this object. It loads up, and that's it. You won't see it at all. Take a look. We don't even see it to rotate it. We can see the bounding box, but the object itself doesn't show up at all. And of course, since it doesn't show up here, it's not going to be the most exciting render you've ever seen either. Nothing will show up. Now, that's because these curves are not visible polygons themselves. So, once again, what's the point of this, you might be asking? Well, the point is simple, and it's very, very important. Being able to draw curves like this simplifies object creation. It lets you draw curved shapes, as opposed to drawing point, 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 point to draw a curve. So these tools for joining things, very, very handy, but since you can't see them here, they don't seem to be very useful. If you want to see a curved figure like this, particularly one of the closed ones, what you need to do is convert it into a bunch of polygons. And there's a quick way to do that within Modeler. What we're going to do is we go into Modeler here, and under the Tools menu, you see we have all these buttons that relate to curves. Now, by the way, Make and Make CL, or Make and Make Closed. Make, Control P, Make Closed, Control L. We saw those already. Now, the function I want you to notice, we'll skip a couple of these, but let's just go to Freeze. And you'll notice right now we have 3 points. That's because in order to create this shape with curves, that's all we need, is just 3 points. But when I hit Freeze, you'll notice we now have a bunch of points here. And that's because Freeze will turn this curved shape into a polygon. And to do that, it's got to make it a bunch of straight line segments. So it makes it a whole bunch of straight line segments. Now, once we have this frozen or turned into a polygon, we can save this. And again, I'll just save it as pick 2. And when I load this up, this is something visible, because now it's actually a polygon here. So, there it is. Now again, to make sure we can see it from either side, I'll put on double-sided. But here's this shape. And again, this is just a super low-res rendering, which is why it looks pretty ratty around the edges. But you see the idea, it is a curved shape. So again, there's a number of ramifications because of these tools. We won't be able to get into all of them in this tape. Some of them have to do with things such as rail extrude and other features like that. But I wanted to show you that you can make points and connect them into polygons using P, open curves using Control P, or closed curves using Control O. Those are all handy features. Now let's start to talk about the primitives. What the primitives are is they're boxes, balls, disc, or cones. Primitive shapes that you can use to create simple objects or to modify and create other objects. And let's start with a box. Pretty simple one, but let's start with that. Let's go into Modeler. Let's go to a blank layer. And here's the way these work. Under Objects, you have box, ball, disc, cone. And you've also got a couple of other objects options that are here, such as sketch and text. We'll be talking about those later. Let's start with box, though, as I said. We drag it out. Now, we just drawn out the shape here, but it doesn't actually make the shape. This is really the equivalent of putting on the crosshairs in the points function. It doesn't actually make this shape until we hit the Make button or the Return key or the right mouse button, of course. So we've got this two-dimensional so far. Let's drag out a third dimension for it in some of these other views. And then when we hit Make, we end up with a box. Now, we still have the old remnants of the bounding box here. To get rid of that, again, just click in a blank area. And to make it a little more interesting, let's go to D and turn on the moving solid display option preview up here. And there's our box. Pretty exciting, eh? Now, we've made this box. It's a box. And you see we can make different dimensions of a box if we want to. We go to a different layer here. Hey, here's another box. Okay, now so far just boxes. But we can make objects. For instance, a real simple object we'll make here in a second by using these controls. So what I'm going to do is make a really simple and non-exciting object, a table, just using what we've seen so far, and show you how we can do these things. And this is, again, not exactly thrilling, but it does give you the basic paradigm of object creation in Lightwave Modeler. So let's go to a layer and make a tabletop. The tabletop. We drag out something in the top view. How big do I want the table to be? Well, probably a little bigger than 40 centimeters. So let's zoom back so our grid is larger. Now, each one of these squares is 1 meter. Let's zoom in. Yeah, we'll keep it there, 1 meter. So let's make it so the table is, I don't know, 1 meter by 1 meter, so it's 3 feet by 3 feet. And we want it to be a lot thinner than it is here. So pretty thin. Okay? We hit the return key. So there's our tabletop. Let's go to another layer and make the legs. Go to another layer, and we'll make the tabletop visible in the background. And now we'll just use this to sort of drag down. We're using the other layer visible so we can see where the legs should go. But well, we want them, of course, this is a basic principle of table design. The legs should meet the bottom of the table there. But let's make it, I don't know, about that high. We'll move it over. And we've made now 1 table leg. Now, if we want to make more table legs, there's a few options that we have here, actually. I'll show you, there's a whole bunch of things we could do. I could actually go over and draw other table legs using the box. Now, that's work, though, so remember, we try to avoid work whenever possible here. The quicker way would be to use something from the multiply menu. And if we go to the multiply menu, what the multiply menu does is everything on it makes multiple copies of an object. In some cases, it will join those copies to make another object. But what we'll do here is just a real simple thing. And under multiply, we'll use mirror. What mirror would do is when we click mirror down, it creates this line. And anything that is on one side of the line will be mirrored on the other side. And you can see right now why I chose to use 2 different layers, one for the top and one for the legs. If I had had the top on the same layer as the leg, when I did a mirror, it would also mirror the tabletop, which would just be weird. We don't want that. So what we're going to do is draw the leg out, mirror it by hitting, again, make, or the return key, or the right mouse button. And now we have 2 legs, and they're identical. They're mirror images, but since this is a square, mirror image doesn't mean much. And since we've got 2 legs on one side, there are certain, sort of physics problems with this table. So what we'll do is we'll do another mirror line just by dragging this around right here. And now it's going to mirror, again, with nothing selected, everything selected. So what's it going to mirror? Well, both legs. We hit make. There we go. 4 legs. Now, another reason that we've done these on 2 separate layers is so we can give different surface names to the legs and to the tabletop. And the way we give things different surface names is you pick the polygons that you want, you select them, and then you go through the surface creation process, which is very simple. But it's important to note you have to select things first. Except, remember, with nothing selected, everything selected. So, if these were on the same layer, we'd have to pick the legs. But since we're on a different layer, it's only going to affect what we have here. Nothing's chosen, so it'll make all the legs one surface. Now, the way you make surface names, and remember, all we're doing here is making names, is to go to the Polygon menu, then go to the Surface button, right down here, Transform Surface. Or you use the keyboard equivalent, which is Q, unshifted Q. Remember, Shift Q quits the program, so don't do that. Now, we get Q here, change surface, we give it a name, again, such as table legs. Just type that in, and we hit either apply or just hit the return key. And now the name table legs has been applied to these legs here. That's all there is to it. It's really pretty straightforward. Now let's give the tabletop its own surface name. Remember, the table legs are in the active layer, the top is on the inactive layer. And you might remember there's a quick way we can switch between those two. That's using the quote key. Laziness. So now we hit Q again, call this table legs. It's not a good name, so we'll call it tabletop. And hit apply. Now this is called tabletop. Now we want to save this, so we select both layers as active. Click on Save As, and call this Bad Table. But what you'll see is when we exit out and load this up, let's clear out all this other stuff we have. Here is our table. And you notice, by the way, the table is sort of off-center here. It's down below the surface and everything. That's because we didn't use the center function before we saved it. If we wanted to move the pivot point, we could do that, but there's a better way to do it. But we can see that there's a problem already with this. So let's not worry about the problem for right now. Let's just skip it and get beyond it. I want to show you that we have two different surfaces. And by the way, the reason I'm doing this is so I can set up another problem, which I'll show you in a second. But for right now, we'll just say, well, let's leave it where it is and give ourselves some surface attributes. We'll take the object, we'll rotate it. You notice having the pivot point here in the corner of the table is, again, a little weird and unwieldy, but we'll get by somehow. Keyframe it. And let's make our table legs sort of bright green, and our table top sort of bright red. Again, this is not the best aesthetic design choice or anything, but you will be able to see the difference here. And again, this is a basic paradigm for object creation. You see, if you can do something like this, this is basically the way a lot of object creation goes. You set up things in different layers, you give them surface names, you save them together. And here's our table. Boy, that's not good looking. Now, what I want to do is I want to fix the pivot point permanently for this table. So what I need to do is I want to go back in and adjust this. And this will introduce another new feature, which is import and export. Now, the way import and export work is there are very handy features in 3.0 and 4000 that allow you to go between layout and modeler. And if you've got something in layout, you can instantly transfer it into modeler, or take something in modeler and transfer it back into the scene that's loaded into layout. It's quite handy. There's a problem you can get into here, and I'll show you exactly what the problem is. And what the problem has to do with this has to do with surfaces. I have saved the surfaces. I have created surfaces for this object. I haven't saved them, just created them. Now I go into modeler. Well, I don't like the way this is centered. Now, if I use the center macro, it will center the table up so it's right in the middle here. But when you're using something like a piece of furniture or something that you know is going to rest on another surface, but particularly furniture or houses, something that you want resting on the ground plane, generally I do not center it so that the center of the object, the pivot point, is in the center of the table. What I would typically do is have it centered if you're looking down on it. So on both the X and Z axis it's centered. But I want the Y axis, I really want the pivot point right at the bottom. So for instance, if it was this glass, I would want the pivot point here. Because on something like a table, I'm generally not going to tilt the table backwards and forwards. So let me set that up. I'm going to just go to Move, Modify Move. By the way, keyboard shortcut for Modify Move is T. Work that one out on your own, but it's T. Trust me on that one, it's T. Now we move up here. Position the legs at the bottom. Now to make sure it's centered on X and Z, I will use that center 1D macro. Center on X, center on Z. We'll leave Y right where it is. I've done the work on the table. I should be happy. Yet, there's a problem here. And the problem has to do with the fact that modeler and layout really are separate programs. This version of the table, the one that I work with in modeler, does not know that we have changed the surfaces on the one outside. So I'm going to export this. I'm going to go to Objects, Export, and I'm holding down Export. And I could either do New, which would create this as a new object in the scene, or I could pick the object I want it to replace, in this case, Bad Table. I pick Export Current Layers to replace Object Bad Table. I hit OK. I exit back out. You'll see that it's in a different position because its center has changed. But there's something else here that's changed, and this is important. When I re-render this, you'll notice it's just going to be white. It's going to be back to default surfaces. Now, in this case where I had surfaces of red and green, you know, big deal, who cares? But often you will be working with something where you spend a long time creating a complex surface. And when you export something from Modeler back out, it will replace the surface attributes with whatever is in Modeler, usually nothing. That's not good. So there's a way around that. It's a pretty simple way. But remember, the important thing here is Modeler and layout are different. If you make a change to surfaces, Modeler doesn't know you've made that change. So the way around that is if you make a change to something, even if you've already got it in Modeler, once you've got surface attributes changed, just re-import it. I'm going to import bad table in, now make whatever changes I want, then re-export it. If you follow that procedure, you've got something you're working with, you go back into Modeler, import it, change it, then export it, it's going to be just as it was surface-wise when you left the scene. Otherwise, Modeler replaces its old surfaces. And again, it's a problem you can run into. You saw it here in a little who cares example, but when you spend 20 minutes or 30 minutes working on a surface, then you make one little change in Modeler and re-export it. That's when, you know, life gets pretty grim. So you want to watch out for that. Now again, this shows you a basic paradigm and shows you import-export. We'll be using those all over the place. And show you a couple more things about center. Now, could you do other stuff with this? Absolutely. And if you're new to making objects, you might even want to stop the tape right now and try making, you know, a more interesting table. We showed you how to make curves, for instance, or you can try making different boxes. But if you get this idea here, this simple idea, you will get object creation. This is the basis of it all. Then it's just problem solving from there. Okay, let's take a look at another topic now. Let's take a look at more primitives. And let's take a look at the ball primitive, which is a little more complex than the box. Let's go to an empty layer and drag out a ball. And again, we drag it out in 2 dimensions to give it some depth. Hit make, and there's our sphere. Now, let me show you, this one was made kind of squished. Another important feature of these primitives, though, is that they have numeric options. I'll be showing you those in depth a little bit later. But let me just show you that instead of trying to drag out, making this size perfectly and center perfectly, if I wanted to, what I could do is use the numeric options, keyboard shortcut N, and set manually things such as the center. I'll set it to 0, 0, 0. And the radius, in other words, how far it is halfway across. So let me set it to 50, 50, and 50 centimeters. Which means this will be a 1 meter across sphere. So we've set that, hit make or return or the right mouse button, and there we go. There's our sphere. And I will save this, again with the name sphere. Let's exit out, clear out our scene, load this up and render it, because this will also show you another point about objects that you create here. We'll load up the sphere. Let's take a look at it. Low res, and we'll render it out. Not exactly thrilling. There's a real problem with this, unless you can see the individual facets, the individual polygons. Take a look. Not thrilling. So what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of that by using another surfaces function, and that's the function smoothing. What smoothing will do is it will get rid of the faceting. It will make those polygons seem to smoothly blend. So we turn on surfaces smoothing, re-render, and now you notice it looks like a smooth sphere shape, except what I want you to notice is look at the sides of the sphere. You notice that they aren't affected at all. And in fact, let me just take the sphere, and I'm going to do sort of one of those Star Trek shots you see all the time in science fiction movies where you have the planet in the lower, sort of one lower corner of the screen. And I'm doing this for a reason. I want you to see there's a real problem here. And that's that if we have this as a planet, let's say, in the lower corner, for a sphere, it's not going to look especially round. What you're going to see is you're going to see the sphere goes like around the side there in what are pretty noticeably straight lines. Now, this is just a low-res render. By the way, a print-res render wouldn't really help here at all. It would still look very bad. And the reason for this is that every object you've ever seen in Lightwave, and we showed you this when we went and made the curves, is just a bunch of straight lines. If something looks curved, it's just because it's got more straight line segments. So there's nothing smoothing can do about this. The rule here is if you want something to look smooth, if you want something to look curved and rounded, it needs to have a lot of polygons. The more polygons, the more straight line segments make those polygons. The bigger an object is, the more memory it takes up, but the smoother it is. So let me just show you how we can make that happen. Let's go into Modeler. And you notice all 8 of our layers are filled. We have a couple of options at this point. We can start just deleting stuff, like we don't need this anymore. Delete it. Pick another layer. Goodbye. I can just go through and pick a bunch of these at once. Delete. They're all gone. Or you could just do a new. That would get rid of things too. But let me just go in and do a sphere here. And I'm not going to draw this out. If I go to numeric options, it remembers the last one that we set. And what I want you to see for options here are the ones up at the top of the menu, sides and segments. This controls how many polygons will make up the object. The default on the sphere is 16 sides and 8 segments, which, as you've seen, does not make a very round sphere. So let's reset that to something much bigger, like 64 sides and 32 segments. By the way, you don't always have to, you notice that segments is half of what sides is. You don't have to do that. It makes a nice even globe, though. It makes a nice even sphere. So I tend to follow that formula. We'll do 64 sides, 32 segments. Hit OK. Hit Make. A little bit rounder, a lot more polygons, but it's a lot smoother. And let's just export this to replace the old sphere. Now remember, since we're exporting this, I have to go back to surfaces and return on smoothing. That's a surface attribute. It was lost, but no big thing there. What you'll see is the entire sphere looks a lot better here. Let's take a look at this as it renders down. And again, this is just in low res. At a higher resolution, it would be very, very round looking. So how many sides and segments should you use for an object? The answer is, I don't know. I have no idea. There's no way I can tell you that. The rule is, just as I said, the more polygons, the more sides, the more segments, the more complex, the more smooth, the more round it is, but the more memory it takes up and the longer it takes to render. So there's always a trade-off there between those two things. Now, the sphere that we had before, let's say it was going to be a planet way off in the distance, 16 and 8 might be okay. But if you're going to be very close to it, you might need to go 64 and 32, or 48 and 24. Or, work out your own two numbers, one of which is half the other. Anything like that, you might need to go to some different level of complexity. The point is, if I were to get up closer to this, it might not look that smooth either. So I might have to use even more segments and sides. Also, of course, because there's that trade-off between realism, or something looking good, and speed, something taking a long time and taking up a lot of memory, often a project will dictate what size you should use. So the rule here is there's no rule. You have to use your own judgment. On some projects, you would go polygon heavy because you're getting paid more or you don't mind the long render times. On some projects, hey, that 16 and 8 is looking pretty good there because you need the fast render times and you don't want to take a lot of time on it. So again, use your best judgment there. But if you see the principle here, it's one that's very, very important. We'll come up in a number of different areas here in Modeler. All right, now let's talk about the one other option that we have there in the ball operator. And the other numeric option here, we hit numeric. By the way, keyboard shortcut is N for numeric, just like it is in Lightwave. The other option we have is we can make a globe or a tessellation. Now, a tessellation, instead of having side segments, has levels. Here's a level 0 tessellation. And you'll notice it's not very round. Let's undo that and do a level 1. And what you'll see is a level 1 tessellation is a little rounder. It's in fact twice as complex as a level 0 tessellation. Level 2 tessellation, twice as complex as a level 1. You start to get the idea behind tessellation here. Basically, each level is twice as complex as the last level. So level 7, for instance, what are you thinking? That's insane. But you get to a certain point where level 4, level 5 is pretty darn complex. Now, I can't stop you. A few of you in the audience will undoubtedly enter level 11 or something. See you next week. It's a lot of fun. Now, that's the way these sphere options work. And you see you have numeric options for all of these. In fact, going back to the old box here, we even have numeric options, which let us enter the size or number of segments. Now we've also got the disk, which lets us create a disk type shape, barrel sort of thing, or the cone. Obviously lets us make a cone. And the thing about the primitives, the important thing I want you to see here, is that the primitives are not just useful for what you see. They have a number of uses, and it's for creating objects, not just, for instance, to use a sphere or a disk, but other shapes that you can make from them. And let me give you a quick example of that. And this is something that can be handy when you're working with logos. It's a shape people sometimes have difficulty making, and it's pretty easy. I'm going to make a star. Now, the way to make a star is, I'm going to pull out the disk here, and I'm going to leave it perfectly flat. No dimension here, and make it. Now, it made it with 16 segments around, because that's the way the disk object defaults. In fact, if we just go to numeric options, you'll see it's 16 sides. So let's undo that, and let's change our sides to something bigger, like 64. And you'll see now it's going to have more segments around, so it's much rounder. Again, remember, the more segments, the rounder something is. Well, what if we change it to something with fewer segments? Like, let's do an undo, numeric, change it to 3 sides around. Triangle, which is not unexpected. We have a triangle there. You put 5 sides, for instance, you have a pentagon shape. Or if you put 10 sides, we can get a star. So I'm making a 10-sided disk here. There it is so far. Now, it's not exactly star-like, but here's the idea. I'm going to take this 10-sided disk and select every other point. One way to do it is you click just on each point. I'm holding down the left mouse button, or I could hold down the Shift key, pick every other point. If you want to, I'll show you a method that just really impresses people. This will win you a love mate for life. This is just a stupid cowboy trick. Basically, I'm going to lasso them by doing every other point. I hold down the right mouse button, and I do this little stitch thing. No purpose except just dumb show-off stuff. So we selected every other point, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move these points in towards the center. And the way I'm going to do that is with the size function under the modify menu. Now, size, since we just have points selected, it's going to pick only the points that we're working with and size them, but it's not going to make the points bigger. It's going to move them towards an area. And it's wherever I click. Like if I click here and hold it down and move to either left or right, you'll notice the points all sort of converge on that point there. They all converge in that center area. Or they all move away from that center area. Let me undo that. Let me click in the middle and size them down. You notice they all move towards the middle. There's a star for you. So it's a quick way, and it shows you, it's a good example of how you can use these primitive shapes to make other more complex shapes. Now, we made this a 2-dimensional object. It's not 3-dimensional, it's just 2-dimensional. And we can turn this into a 3-dimensional object by using another important feature here in Lightwave, and it's the extrude feature. And we use this a lot when we're doing with text and logos. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the multiply menu, pick extrude, and remember, with nothing selected, everything selected. But whenever you have something chosen, like the 5 points here, this would extrude those 5 points, which would not be good. So we're going to deselect the points. Then reselect extrude here. And now we click on the front face. The way extrusion works, it's like taking a shape, a flat shape, and pushing it off into 3 dimensions. Now what's going to happen then is it's going to be 3-dimensional. It's going to have some depth to it. And we just click on the front face, and let's back off a little bit. Because you see this line, this shows us how deep the object will be. If I hit make, we end up with a fairly deep star there. If we don't want it to be that deep, we have 2 options. One, use the numeric option. And again, you notice numeric options, much like make, come up everywhere in Modeler. So knowing that N keyboard shortcut helps a little bit. We can set both sides and extent, segments and extent here. Extent determines how deep the object will be. Segments means it will split it up into multi-segment parts, which can be handy for some reason. Now, what we're going to do is let's set it up to 0.5 for our extent. You notice the line only goes half the way now. If we set it up to, by the way, when we come back, you notice it's changed to 50 centimeters. Let's change it to, 20. And so now it's thinner. Or we can just click and drag on this bar and set it to any thickness we want. Click on that, and there we go. There's a star. Now there's another feature in multiply which is very handy especially when you're working with a simple geometric shape like this. And this is a good trick for logos. One thing that you can do on logos, which often looks very good, is aside from having the logo fly in, you put basically just sort of a lot of garbage in the background. And the sort of term that's been come to know in Lightwave on this are nirnies. And nirnies, it's a term that Ron Thornton from Babylon 5 sort of came up with. It's where I first heard it. And what nirnies are is there any kind of crap floating around in the background that serves no purpose except it just looks kind of nice. And you see this stuff on network TV all the time in logos. You've just got stars or streaks or in fact pretty much any shape you might find in a popular breakfast cereal. We're trying to get a product promotion here or something like that, but any, stars, clovers, anything like that, floating around in the back of a logo, it will look good. So we're going to get all this stuff kind of moving around in the back. So there we go. Just trying to mess with the audio a little bit. Okay. Now, we want a bunch of these stars. So rather than creating them manually, what we're going to do is we're going to use another feature in Multiply, Clone. Now what Clone will let us do is it will take whatever is selected, in this case, nothing, so everything, and it's going to make copies of it. And let's have it make 9 clones. And each one, this star is about 1 meter across. So let's have it offset each one about 1.2 meters in the x direction. And we hit OK. That's all I'm going to hit. Just 9 clones, offset 1.2 meters in x. And what we end up here with, let me hit A to fit it in, is a whole bunch of stars in a row here. Now, if we want to, we can actually build this up so we have a wall of stars by doing another clone, 9 clones, and instead of doing it in the x, we'll do it in the y direction, and that will give us this whole wall of stars. So you see the idea there behind using clone to make them off in one direction, then off up to the top. However, there's another way to do this, and that's with the array function. And so let me just get rid of a lot of these stars here. Pick them all, and I'm just going to delete them. And just delete those. So we're back to 1 star. The way the array function works is it's sort of a multiple clone. It will do it in x, y, and z dimensions if you want. And all you do is you pick whatever you want to affect, hit array, and I'll have it do a 10 by 10 array just using x and y. If we did it in z, it would of course push it back. We don't want that. And we can either do offset automatic or manual. And if we did automatic, each star would be touching the other ones, which we may or may not want. But in this case, I want to do it myself, so I'll set a manual offset of 1.2. And we'll end up with, again, this kind of giant wall of stars here. Again, this is a nice thing to have moving around, rotating in the background or something like that. And you can do this with any simple geometric shape you set up. Now, let's talk about the text function real quickly here, because we've seen a lot of things that you can do with these simple shapes. Let's show you some stuff to do with text now. And again, it uses some of the basic functions here. So we'll just go to an empty layer, go to text, type in, our logo, company name, whatever. Now we pick a font from any of the PostScript fonts, and that is pretty much all of the fonts except for the ones in the AGFA drawer or the color fonts drawer. Most of the other fonts are PostScript Type 1 fonts. This is any IBM style PostScript Type 1 font. And I'm going to use the Harvest Italic font just because it's one I like. We pick the font we want, have the text, hit OK, and there's your text right there. Now, it's completely flat, so we give it some depth. Multiply, extrude. That'll do. I don't like the pivot point. The pivot point is down at one corner. By the way, there are times you might want the pivot point at the edge of a logo. One move you see actually quite frequently is the logo kind of flinging in from the side, sort of behind the camera. And at that point, the side of the logo, the pivot point, should be at really the edge of the logo. So there are times when you might want to do that. But let me just hit the F1 key to center it up in this case. And now let's talk about another new feature in Lightwave 3.0 and 4000, the bevel feature. The way bevel works is you pick the faces you want. Now with nothing chosen, it will bevel the whole thing. So let's pick the front face. Remember the lazy way to do that. Just the front face is chosen. Then we go to multiply, bevel, and we pick an inset and shift. Now what you want to use here generally is 25 millimeters, which should We go to millimeters for our units and put 25 by 25. And this tends to work real well with most text objects. So let's put 25 by 25. And you notice it puts a nice beveled face if we zoom in here on the text. Now, there's a problem with doing a bevel like this. There's a problem you can run into, and let me show you what that problem is. Let me just save this out as logo. And to see this problem, we have to actually go out into layout. And I'm just going to load the logo object up quickly here. And let's go to surfaces. By the way, you notice that surface name is tabletop. That's because whenever you give an object a surface name, like we did with the table before, any new polygons created are given that same surface name. So it's got the name tabletop. Normally we'd go in and give it a different surface name, but I just want you to see that whenever you give something a name, any new polygons you create have that name here. So let's rename it, in this case, logo. And let's load up a surface. I'm going to use a shortcut here, which is there's a number of surfaces such as gold, silver, and copper. And these surfaces come with the toaster, and they're very handy for making logos, except there's a problem. And let me just go to a view where we can see the logo fairly well. And we have nice beveled text. We've loaded the gold surface. And let me just do a low-res render here. And to cut time, we're just going to show you the final version of this. But what you'll see is, take a look at the screen now, you're going to see that this looks like death. It looks like someone melted chocolate or something like that. The surface does not look good, and the bevel is not distinct at all. And this has to do with the way the smoothing function works in the toaster. You notice we have smoothing on in the surface attribute. And the way smoothing works is it's got three things here. It's got the side of the logo, the front face of the logo, and then the bevel between the two. And what it's doing is it's taking that bevel and it's going, okay, well, let me round off, let me smooth off the bevel face. And whenever you have smoothing on, it tries to smooth things that are less than 90-degree angles if you leave the smoothing to its default setting here. Now, if we turn smoothing off, in a sense, we can get rid of this problem. But we create a whole new one. And you'll see that here, where now the surfaces look better. They don't have that swirly melted chocolate look anymore. But if you look at these sides, we now have the faceting that goes with not having smoothing on. You can see the individual facets, the individual polygons. So the trick is we want something where the surfaces look good, and it's not trying to smooth out over the bevel. So we have a distinct bevel, good-looking surfaces, but the bevel themselves are smoothed off. And there's a really easy way to do that. And it's something that goes by, in fact, so quickly. I'll show you the trick. It goes by really quickly. You might want to go back and watch it again. And I'm just saying that because it's based on experience of showing this trick to a lot of people. There's nothing to it, and it goes by in a snap. So here's the way it looks now. Not good. Here's what you do. Again, the problem is that the computer sees the side, the front, and the bevel as one continuous thing. Here's the solution. We are going to pick just the bevel face. Quick way to do that, pick the bevel and the front using lasso. Bevel and the front are chosen. Then, deselect the front. Click above, release below. It deselects just the front. So now the bevels are all that's chosen. Ready, here it goes. Cut, cuts them out. Paste, paste them back. The end. That's all you have to do. And you need to do this pretty much anytime you use a bevel and you're going to have smoothing on. The reason this works is when you cut those bevels away, it created duplicate points. It does not want to remove the points from the original object because otherwise it would mess up the object completely. So it creates duplicate points. And then when you paste the bevel face back in, you've got now a duplicate set of points. And so what it's seeing now is, instead of seeing the front face, the bevel face, and the side face as one continuous surface, it now says, okay, the bevel is distinct from the front and the side. And by doing this simple little thing, just doing a cutaway, then paste with the bevel, let's export this to replace. And again, we will have lost our surfaces because we didn't re-import it, but in this case, again, no big deal here. Load surface, gold, and I'm going to leave smoothing on. Doesn't make any difference. Watch what happens. You can see the frame here. This looks considerably better. We still have a very distinct surface for the front, but the sides and the bevels look great, and this is the right way to do it. Again, it goes by quickly, but all we're doing is we're cutting the bevel faces out and pasting them back in. That's it. Finally, let me just show you one other trick. I'm going to actually save this object. The name Scott logo, and go through and save this so we can use it later. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just re-import this so it saves in with the surfaces. One thing I will often do, by the way, is give the front face of a logo a different surface name. There's nothing wrong with leaving it the way it is there. You see it makes the bevels distinct. But often I will go through and give the front polygon kind of a different look. So the front faces are chosen there. And now I just go again, polygon, surface, fake logo front, hit apply, there we go. We'll just resave that from in here. Okay, now I'm going to show you one other little quick trick that involves beveling, and it's a handy object to make for logos and stuff like that, and it's just this sort of neat metal honeycomb wall kind of thing, and it's an absolute no-brainer object. Here's the way, but it looks pretty neat. Here's the way it works. We'll just go to an empty layer, and I'm going to make a box. I'm going to make it big, like 40 meters by 40 meters, and I'm going to make it one-dimensional, perfectly flat. Now, I'm not going to make it with just one polygon. I'm going to go into the numeric options and give it, let's say, I don't know, 25 segments by 25 segments. And the reason I'm doing this is because of the way beveling works. You need to see this to see how beveling works. I make this 25 by 25. So here's the old gigantic box thing. Now, the way beveling works is beveling affects every single individual polygon here. So if I do a bevel on this now, and let me go to multiply, bevel, and I will use a bigger number here. I will use 0.1 meter. What you'll see is, let me zoom in a little bit. What we end up with here is sort of like this almost tiled floor thing, where each one of these is sort of now, each square tile has been kind of raised and given a beveled edge. Now, this is handy. Let me call this, just save it with the name metal wall. And now let's exit modeler. And let's just clear this as a scene and load up the old metal wall there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up the metal wall and apply the silver surface to it. And I'm going to I'm going to do two things to it. First, I'm going to turn off smoothing because we don't want any smoothing on this. It's all flat faces. And second, I'm going to give it sort of a more bluish color here, heavier blue. And what you'll see, especially when you sort of fly up close to this at all, let me tilt it back at a bit of an angle, is you get this, like I say, sort of neat rippling metal effect. So let me show you just a render we did here in medium res. And we just tilted it to the sides so it looks sort of more like diamonds than straight on squares. But this, again, this is a pretty nice looking object. All right, that's about all the time we have for this tape. Now, we've given you the basics of using the program, a lot of stuff that we take for granted when you start working with the program, and a lot of little tricks on speeding up your work. In addition to that, we covered some important things in dealing with text and logos. Particularly, the rule about bevels there can make your logos look tremendously better right on the face of it. Now, in the second tape in the series, we'll start to actually put together objects, but make sure you're fairly comfortable with this stuff, and even if you go through the second tape on this, come back to this tape and rewatch it again, because you'll see there's a lot of stuff here that sort of went by you the first time. Now, if you have any questions or comments on this tape, please don't hesitate to write to us at the address you see on your screen right now. Until next time, I'm Lee Stranahan, and we will see you later. Thanks a lot.